monetización de activos en el
asset monetization in the Metaverse. Dorian, Slater, Thomas, Frankfurt, Kurnit, Klein, Selz, US. Adrian, Perry, Covington, and Burling, LLP, USA. And moderator, Guillermo, Carey, Chile. Thank you very much, Guillermo Carey, a partner of Carey, Chile, who will be moderating this panel. Thank you very much and welcome, everyone. I know it's a difficult time after lunch. You would like to take a nap, but I see everyone's engaged in this topic, which is fascinating. Today we're going to speak about monetization in Metaverse and what do we want to achieve. So Leo and Matias previously opened our minds with all the transactions and the topics in which they're operating in this world of Metaverse. So we in this panel, besides also opening your minds of where this new world is going, we're also going to focus on certain enabling factors for this monetization to work. And then we'll make some comments regarding ourselves as attorneys in Latin America and what position we should assume in this topic of monetization of all and also Metaverse in general. For that reason, it's my great pleasure to have two very distinguished professionals, experts in this topic, whom I'll introduce. And to take this panel a little more fluid, I will change to English.
First, I would like to introduce Adrian Perry. Adrian is a partner at Covington and Burlington's Technology and IP Transactions Group, one of the leaders of the firm's Metaverse, NFT, and Web3 practice, and co-chair of the firm's music industry group. His practices focus on matters involving emerging and innovative uses of technology. Adrian has a number of recognitions in many magazines. I could read a lot about it, but I would like to highlight a few things that really surprised me, and I should have known this before Adrian, but Adrian is or was a musician who has toured internationally, and he used to be a member of the Saturday Night Live show before going to law school. So he's a real artist and he knows the entertainment world. So we're very happy of having him with us. So Adrian, you should have told us about Saturday Night Live, good stories there. And then we have Dorian Slater Thomas. He's from a LA-based firm called Frankfurt, Kurnit, Klein, and Selz. And he has been very active in the firm's interactive entertainment group and advertising, also the marketing and public relations group, where he handles a wide range of transactional work for prominent agencies, brands, platforms, developers, publishers, and individual creative talent. The Legal 500 list lists him as a rising star in advertising and marketing for 2021. So, excuse me, you may see we have excellent speakers to address this issue on monetization. So first, and we've seen how many opportunities and transactions of the Metaverse and the tokens in this Metaverse world and the NFTs. So we would like to pass the floor to Adrian and then to Dorian to explain what are the enabling factors, why NFTs could provide the backbone for transactions in the Metaverse, and also all the interconnectivity issues between the different platforms. What do content creators need to understand and know to do this? Dorian?
I'll go to you first, Adrian.
Oh, sorry, sure. Adrian. Sorry, Adrian?
Yeah, no problem, and thanks for having me. So I think that the first thing we're talking about NFTs and why they might be valuable in the Metaverse is the technology provides a lot of certainty in terms of rights transfers. So if you are selling digital goods in a metaverse experience and you're relying on NFTs to represent those transactions, you have a pretty solid transaction record of, it went from A to B to C, which provides some certainty and comfort for people that are transacting in the metaverse. So NFTs, we've all heard of them at this point, and generally you think of them as like a collectible, or it's a token that's associated with some artwork or a piece of video content or something like that. But there's a lot of utility behind the technology, and that's why I think, and a lot of folks think, that NFTs will be useful for any types of goods transfers within a metaverse environment. So it could be collectibles, or it could be anything. You think about your avatars in the metaverse and you want to buy a Gucci pair of shoes that's virtual, a digital version. If your purchase is represented by an NFT, you have that certainty of sort of being able to track that back to maybe Gucci as like the minting entity, so okay, this is a real digital version of these shoes. And then when you go to sell them later, perhaps, theoretically, there's a lot of talk around whether digital goods will degrade in the same way that physical goods do. That would be built into the code. But the point is if you want to resell them, the next person down the line will have the certainty of knowing, okay, these are verified. This is, it came originally from Gucci, then this person bought it, now I'm buying it. It's all on the blockchain. So that's why, NFT technology has got a lot of power, and I think is going to be very important in terms of, opportunities for monetizing the metaverse. So with that, I don't know, Dorian, if you want to jump in on anything. I want to make sure we each get a minute to talk on each of these.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. Appreciate that. I'm going to see if we have a slideshow here as well to kind of help us give some visuals. Let's see. Maybe. There we go. All right. Cool. Sorry, Adrian. We are going to miss you for a second.
That's okay.
So I think NFTs are obviously important. I think blockchain is important. And I think a lot of our conversation that we've been having today about blockchain is important. But I would also recognize that a lot of the metaverse or platforms who are offering the metaverse are doing so without blockchain. So a lot of our work, particularly with IP lately, although it might be tangential to the blockchain, isn't necessarily blockchain based or has anything to do with NFTs, but I still think that there are technology limits or also platform limits that we should know about, or even platform just functionalities that we should be aware about when we're trying to monetize certain things within currently existing metaverse, metaverse-I, metaverses, however you pluralize metaverse. I think it's up to you. One example that I think is a good one is Chipotle. This last Halloween was set to be one of the first restaurants ever to open a restaurant in the metaverse. This one was going to be in Roblox. And Chipotle often does a Halloween-typed promotion where they give away burritos instead of burritos. And their goal here was to give away burritos and actually have physical burrito, essentially get one free cards in the real world. All of this promotion done through Roblox. Of course, the Friday morning that the promotion is set to launch, Roblox goes down and is down for 48 hours. So what do you do if you're set to be the biggest brand to open up a restaurant in the metaverse ever for your yearly promotion and the platform isn't functioning? So these things, even though blockchain, I agree, is very secure and we're having minimal issues with it, still some of these basic, well, I don't want to say basic, but more traditional platforms like Roblox, you might have tech issues. So when you're thinking about offering a sponsorship or having a brand come in and monetize by having a promoted world or a space, you need to think about what the technology is allowing for, what capabilities there are, and importantly, if you're doing any kind of contracting, you want to make sure that you have like force majeure provisions or ways that you can be made whole if there were to be an issue with one of these promotions, like the burrito. I think we have one more quickly as well. This one, I think it's also interesting to think about the way that we're presenting or platforms are presenting transfer of assets in the metaverse, and I think here education and advertising is important. I think a couple of people, James Gatto touched on this, a couple of other panelists from earlier today touched on this. Users are confused, and rightfully so, because we're doing a good job of confusing them as to whether or not they own something or if they just have a license to it. And I think that the platforms can help themselves by better indicating to users whether they're licensing or offering ownership rights for certain digital assets. This slide represents a lawsuit that was brought recently, actually on behalf of a bunch of minors in the United States against Roblox, who thought that they had purchased shirts and clothing within Roblox. This is kind of a pattern how you can make your own shirt. And however, when they went to go wear or put on this shirt, some of the products that they had previously purchased were no longer in their library. Roblox had deleted them. So their claim was, I bought this, I own it, how do you delete this? This is mine. Well, in reality, they don't own it. They have a license to use the clothing as purchased. However, there was confusion here, right? Because Roblox wasn't clear in how they were transferring those rights to their consumers. If Roblox did a better job and said, here's your licensed t-shirt, or somehow otherwise clarify to people that this is a licensed right instead of an ownership right, I think we would have had less issues here. So I think it goes back to the way that the platforms are organizing themselves, how they're allowing their functionalities to be used, and how they're advertising those to users. It can help avoid a lot of issues when monetizing either content or assets.
Thank you. And many of you guys probably have to advise some clients. And what would you recommend from a legal and from a technical standpoint if you want to have the most interoperable NFT, and also how would a platform, cross-platform monetization work? You should rely more in a broader code or better contracts. I don't know.
Sure. I think interoperability is a big piece of the metaverse that is one that's interesting to think about, and one that I think brings a lot of people to the metaverse, whatever that is, to think that they can go from different location or different virtual space to other virtual space. I think it's pretty clear, though, that we don't have the technology for that yet. So while I think it's important for us to think about it from a theoretical legal perspective, we can't necessarily let the legal precede the technology, right? We have to first see what these tech builders actually build for us, and then we can craft licenses to better convey what rights are being transferred to what locations. I do think that there are going to be certain consumable goods, like Nike, for example, which we'll talk about shortly, will want to be able to license its products across various platforms. But then those platforms might have I see a whole world of web of exclusivity, essentially, where the platforms then might be, you have to go to, let's say, Beta's metaverse in order to buy Nikes, but you can go to Zeta's metaverse to buy some other type of shoe, and then a Reebok, right? There could even be a sort of like a streaming wars that we're having right now, where certain types of content are absorbed by certain types of metaverses, so that you have to have multiple metaverses in order to enjoy all types of content. I think we would try to avoid that just based on the lessons we've been learning from streaming. But if you have the interoperability tech, that's the first piece, we can draft the licenses for that. We just need to be clear to understand what the restrictions are, where you can use those, when consumers can take goods across different platforms. I think it would also be worth noting, if a platform is having an issue, who's responsible for resolving that issue? Is it the brand? Is it the seller of the NFT? Or is it whomever else might be involved? So there's a lot more information that we need first, but the beginning is just going to be the tech. Let's see what we can actually do, and then from there we can decide if we need to have different licenses or laws to make that happen.
Thank you. And from a brand perspective and owners, it seems to be that they want to be as broad as possible. But Dorian, from more on the tech side, do you see the platforms wanting to be more open than restricted because might be more technical challenges? How do you envision that this will turn out?
Over to you, Adrian. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I agree with what Dorian said. You know, that I think everyone sees the potential that people can take goods from platform to platform, but we're still waiting to kind of see how that plays out from a tech perspective. But we are seeing it right now with NFTs. Like, you know, I'm engaged in a bunch of NFT-focused projects, for example, and one of the things we have to worry about in those is, when you buy an NFT on platform 1, can you sell it, you know, on platform 2, and then onwards to different platforms. So we are starting to see this sort of platform interoperability question come up, and in this specific NFT context, which is a good preview of how things, you know, might have to play out in the broader, you know, context of, you know, if I've bought Nike shoes for my avatar and I move over to another platform with my same avatar wearing the Nike shoes, but that second platform doesn't have the exclusivity, does that mean that my logo is blurred or something? You know what I mean? Like that type, you're going to have to start working through those kinds of questions from the content and brand side. But right now, I mean, again, one of the good things about blockchain technology is that it does allow, you know, depending on what protocol you use, it does allow for this sort of common backbone that you can plug into, which will make it easier to transfer rights across platforms and track ownership and access. But again, you'd have to be, that stands for products where you have an NFT associated with it, so you're relying on that blockchain. Again, Dorian's right that you don't need blockchain technology to have a metaverse or to buy goods or anything like that. It's just something that I at least think it will be helpful. But this interoperability point, I mean, is already here in terms of these NFT projects, at least, because the expectation from a lot of folks is that when you buy an NFT, you can sell it anywhere on any platform, and that isn't always the case. So we're already dealing with these issues and figuring out, like, well, how will smart contracts be honored on all the different platforms out there, or some of them, and what do we do if the royalties don't get split the right way? These questions are already coming up, which is helpful because it'll give us a sense of the types of things we'll need to deal with when the technology allows for even more interoperability between platforms and the content being able to move, you know, as free as the content owners and licensees agree that they can.
Thank you, Dorian. Now, what issues will content owners and creators need to consider from a tech perspective when bringing their content to Metaverse, and particularly around policing for infringement or other misuse, reputational, legal? I mean, sure. What issues do you see there?
Sure. We're already starting to see issues, I think, particularly from infringement and licensing perspective, and it's something that, you know, I think lots of brands and also platforms are thinking about. For example, I think this is a good one here that we have up here on the screen. This is Nike. We've been talking a lot about Nike, but just recently, Nike brought suit against this StockX company here. You guys might have seen this lawsuit in the news. It's been covered quite a bit in the industry. Essentially, StockX issues these NFTs that are up here on the right side that then correspond to actual physical inventories that StockX has of collectible Nike shoes that then they are selling by purchasing the NFT. Query whether they're actually really selling those shoes. There's a question as to whether they have those shoes. There's also a question as if the shoes are knockoffs. Nike did a little research and found out that some of those shoes are fake. But Nike brought suit against StockX, claiming that they're infringing Nike's rights, particularly trademark, in reproducing the shoes and Nike's logo. StockX was claiming this is just me advertising the sale of my shoes, which I should have the right to do under first sale doctrine and fair use. But here I think it's a little bit more nuanced in that NFTs themselves are purchasable products and products themselves that Nike is also competing in the market with. Nike has its own set of NFTs that people might want to purchase. So there could be consumer confusion, arguably, between the StockX and the Nike NFTs or products. I think what's important here is just noting that infringement is going to be a huge piece of this puzzle, particularly as we have more people moving into the space and creating different things, whether it's original works or derivative works or using of others' marks. I think some companies are taking, I say aggressive, but that's not a judgmental statement. I just think that they're being very proactive in how to protect their rights in the metaverse. For example, Nike has moved to register their marks in this digital space, which is interesting, and we're seeing other brands follow suit to see if they can seek trademark registration within this sort of set of digital goods, which isn't necessary per se in order to have a trademark in that space, but I think it is sort of helping to signal that they are more sophisticated and that they are going to be entering the space, and most importantly, that they expect on enforcing their rights in the space. So I think that that's going to be a good signifier of those brands who are very serious about getting into the space. And I think it's also important to note that this is an interesting example because it's not just a brand that isn't in the virtual space already. Nike is very much in the metaverse, or at least in Roblox metaverse. They have Nike Land, which when I last checked in March, which now I admit is a little bit stale, that there was upwards of 70 million people had visited Nike Land. So there's a lot of people who are interacting with these goods already. So if you were to then see a StockX NFT, I don't think it's unreasonable to argue that you might be confused as to whether that was an official Nike NFT or digital asset, or if it was produced by StockX or a third party.
Thank you. Adrian?
Yeah, I mean, look, the brand management issue is a huge question. And again, it comes down to technical controls. And in the early stages of this, we call it metaverse, but I mean, there's metaverses that exist now, and it's, different platforms are being developed, but we're just using the very general term to refer to this. I think one of the keys will be, how easy are the technical controls to use, so that brands and content owners can get comfortable with deploying their content in the space. And again, I mean, I think it's like building the boat as you're floating through the river, like as you go, right? I mean, people don't want to sit and wait for the perfect solution and to make a deal. Folks want to make deals and get moving. Which is great, but I think what's going to end up happening is we'll start to see more of the pain points, more of the gaps as folks realize issues will come up real time and think like, okay, well, we have to figure out a way to fix that. So as long as people are, if you're making deals in this space and you are comfortable with that risk and sort of you're going to have to iterate through it, there might be some bumps along the way, then it can be really exciting. But it's definitely an area that has a lot of risk because, it's unclear how much control you can have, in certain platforms over the content and how much it matters to you to maintain that control. I mean, those are all questions that, we ask clients when they're doing a deal to enter into this space. It's important to understand how your content can be used. Can it be taken down, or how can end users interact with it? Are you okay with that? Can you control it? Do you care about controlling it? Those are all things. It's a combination of business considerations, tech capability, and then legal risks, right? Especially if you're incorporating third-party IP. It can get thorny if you're not confident that your IP can be used, or the third-party IP you're licensing from someone else is going to get used in the way that you agreed it is going to be used, then you might not be so sure about allowing it to get deployed in a space where there's not as much control. So there's a bit of, kind of a risk calculus there that folks undergo, and that impacts the content they choose for some of these early partnerships while they test the waters. So again, I mean, it's part of the excitement of this space is just how it's changing so much, but you have to keep your eye on a lot of these issues and, do what you can in the contracts to kind of mitigate risk. But at the end of the day, it really is a balancing act, because you don't want to be completely sit completely on the sidelines and if you want to be in the space, because you have to try and at least get up to speed on the issues.
Yeah, and I think that's great. Adrian, I also like that you said balancing act, because I think it's also important. I mean, clearly this is a presentation about monetization, so that's important, and I do think that monetization ultimately is a good thing and will help to propel the metaverse or mini metaverse. But I think it is also important to think about a balance, and there's a lot of this that's been happening. Obviously, it's I think what started a lot of the NFT craze, apart from just sort of the investment, for lack of better words, capacity of an NFT, but art is a big piece behind this as well. So I think we want to allow for monetization, and we also want to protect IP rights in a way that doesn't constitute infringement, but I also think that we want to allow for artistic creation where possible under the law. And so I think that that's going to be an interesting balance to find in the metaverse, to see what we feel is still a fair use or protected by the First Amendment as opposed to something that is more infringing. I think that there's still going to be a lot more cases that come down on this to kind of see what might be considered more artistic use as opposed to what is infringing use. Just going to mention this one real quickly. These are the Meta Birkins that this guy Mason Rothschild is making and selling. And of course, Hermes wasn't too happy about this and has brought suit. And we'll see. I think this is also interesting because Hermes, at least as of when these Meta Birkins were being created, wasn't quite yet into the digital space. So it wasn't like a Nike situation where we already had digital Nikes and then a newcomer, so to speak, making their own digital Nike assets. There, at this point in time, were no digital Hermes Birkin products officially to compete with. So that's another interesting, I think, analysis when you're thinking about infringement, is whether or not there already is an official use in the digital space. But ultimately, it's going to come down to some kind of artistic expression analysis, and we'll see where it lands.
Excellent. And us IP lawyers tend to see everything from an IP perspective, but what are other asset monetization opportunities you guys see from the real world to introduce by the metaverse experiences? What have you seen for your clients and what they're looking for?
Sorry.
Sure. Tell me when to stop. I think there's a lot happening, and it's exciting, it's cool. There are a lot of opportunities to monetize currently related to the metaverse or blockchain-like assets. This is one you guys might have heard of, the Tarantino incident, where he was going to make an NFT that included a piece or a portion of his handwritten script for Pulp Fiction. When he did this, Miramax, the studio, was not too pleased about this and tried to prevent him from releasing these NFTs. And Tarantino argued that he had the ancillary rights in order to do this based on the contract that he had signed with Miramax. So I think it's going to go, this is important whenever you're trying to monetize third-party content, or even sometimes monetize your own content if you're coming from the artist's perspective, is to really look at any of the agreements that you've signed to really understand what rights you have to the goods and whether or not you need any additional permissions. That being said, I think it's always worthwhile coming at something with a spirit of compromise. From my understanding, I didn't work on this particular deal or this particular litigation, but from my understanding, there were previous communications between Tarantino and Miramax about having some kind of collaborative NFT offering, and Tarantino decided not to proceed with that, and then obviously Miramax wasn't happy. So I feel like, as always, many legal issues can be resolved with savvy business acumen. So I think that is always a good piece of advice if you're working or counseling with a client who's engaging with IP, whether it be their own or third party, but there are other owners or interest holders. It's always a good idea, I think, to have that conversation and see if it's something that will be an issue. And ultimately, if you're going to pay money, you may pay less money in a revenue share than you will in litigation fees. So the NFTs clearly are one way that we're monetizing. I think another way that we're monetizing in the metaverse quite consistently is through creators, and these come in many different ways, right? I think traditionally we might think of them like influencers on Instagram, but these creators are more like in the current metaverse, whether it's Roblox, Fortnite, Meta's Horizon, some other places. And essentially they are there building worlds within these metaverse that you can then come visit. And these creators are then being paid in many ways. Sometimes they're being paid by the platforms. Sometimes they're being paid by brands in order to make sponsored worlds within these metaverses. And in many ways, the platform or the creators are taking a cut from this, whether it also be from selling digital assets within those worlds or just the creation of the worlds themselves. I think this is a big piece that platforms are really focused on and getting into. I feel like platforms learned from sort of the Instagram era that they sort of lost out on a big chunk of money by not being able to engage with influencers directly or creators directly via their platform. So I think this is going to be huge and continue to be a big program that we see offered by these various platforms, which is great. I think that it brings a lot of issues though. One issue in particular that I've been wrestling with lots of our clients is if you are paying a creator to create you content on a regular basis, are they your employee? And if they're your employee, do you have to adhere to traditional employment obligations, tax withholdings, all different benefits, all different kinds of stuff? It's been a big issue. I think another issue is that a lot of the more popular content creators in these worlds are minors. So not only may you be benefiting off of somebody else's labor, are you benefiting off of child labor? And if so, is that an issue? And how do you work through that? So I think that's huge. Similarly with this world space, which I think is kind of a big piece that I've been working on a lot lately. Not this one in particular, but this is essentially a creator challenge that was offered by Roblox, where essentially Roblox issues this call to action to any user that says, hey, come create these worlds, let's see how good of a world you can make and maybe you'll win something, right? And this one in particular was a creator challenge based off of Jurassic World, also promoting the movie. I think you can probably assume in this instance that Roblox entered into some kind of partnership or license agreement with Jurassic Park, but there are many instances in which there wasn't a license obtained. So what risk are you taking on if you're asking third parties or even users to create user-generated content that is specifically targeted at derivative works or even using existing IP? So that's a hurdle. And even if you are able to figure out how to do that, how do you license for that? Are we getting sub-licenses for users? Or it can be pretty complex pretty quickly. And then enforcing that is also an issue. How do you not make, a Jurassic World in Roblox that somehow violates Jurassic World's brand guidelines or image requirements or codes of conduct? I think that that's going to be a huge issue that we're dealing with.
Thanks. And Dorian, do you want to Adrian, sorry, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, so there's also a lot of regulatory issues that come up, and that's frequently where a lot of the concern is, particularly in the NFT space. Is it a security or is it not a security? How are you dealing with anti-money laundering and know your customer protocols? How are you dealing with FTC issues, marketing and consumer protection issues? There's a bunch of regulatory boxes that we check. When we work on projects, we usually, I like to say that, NFT and Metaverse projects, they usually require a little bit of time from a lot of people to really do it the right way. Because there's so many different aspects to think about, and to get comfortable with the risks, you have to at least understand what you're going into. So it's not that you can't do stuff, you just need to understand, where the pitfalls are. So just in addition to what Dorian was saying, I mean, those are just a few other areas of legal risk that we look at, both for NFT projects, but also broader Metaverse projects, because one of the big things that excites the crypto community and the Web3 community is the ability to sort of transact freely, to not necessarily be identified in the same way you are sort of with the traditional internet, but then that sort of intention with the idea of like trying to put in like a know your customer protocol where you figure out whether someone's on a sanctions list or not, and are you violating law by selling a digital product to this person, right? So that has been something that we've been navigating with folks, and again, nothing's insurmountable. It just takes, some thinking and that balancing act that we were talking about earlier. So that's what I'd add as far as other things you have to think about beyond just the IP and brand stuff.
I think I agree with you. I also think focusing on the beyond the IP and brand piece, but is important to a monetization, is particularly if you're looking for third-party sponsorships or a robust sponsorship program within your metaverse, that it's going to have to be a well-patrolled and safe space, so to speak, because lots of these large brands don't want to be seen with something that's unreputable. So content moderation, I think, is going to be really huge, and it's already been a very difficult piece to try to deal with. And moderating the content is how you would keep this safe space, both from IP infringement, but also from other nefarious activities, right? And I've been working with some of these platforms and figuring out how we're going to moderate this content, and it even comes down to simple things like, are we going to require everybody in the metaverse to speak the same language? If not, how are we going to be able to translate codes of conduct so that they're the same across languages? How are we going to enforce those codes of conduct in different jurisdictions if there is jurisdiction outside of the US or wherever you might be engaging with? And if there were to be a dispute about a particular piece of infringement, what law would apply? Would it be the law of the metaverse? Would it be the law where the user is located? Would it be the law where the violation occurred? Would it be the law where the server is sitting? So there's lots of just even technical kind of procedural legal issues to think about when trying to create a space that's going to foster monetization. And those are also proving to be difficult. I know that we've talked a little bit about terms as well, but that's going to be a huge piece. Obviously, there's going to be guidelines and terms of use that we want these folks to agree to create a safe space. And you might have seen in the US that there's been some hurdles with having terms being deemed valid by users clicking through and accepting those, which is even more the case with minor users. So I think all of these procedural elements, as I'm calling them, are something to think about when you're advising clients either who may be creating a metaverse or who might be looking to engage with a particular metaverse, is to see if they have robust terms, if they have robust community guidelines, do they have enforcement mechanisms, do they have a reputation of being able to uphold their enforcement rules or even any of their appeals or ruling jurisdictions within the platform themselves, just in order to test it to see if it's someplace that you feel like is brand safe for your brand. Now, you may have a brand out there, a brand client who's, totally aggressive or on the edge and is fine operating in more of the gray. And if that's the case, there might be more opportunities available to them.
Hey, Adrian, and we've been focusing a lot on the NFT and the token side, but what about another aspect like avatar conduct? How could that affect the brands, the owners, and if, I don't know, an avatar commits an illicit act, how do you see that going, not only from the NFT side, but from the avatar side?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question right now. And Dorian, I think, alluded to this earlier, that there's a question about, on these platforms, who's going to monitor behavior, who's going to monitor usage of the brands or content, because there's some platforms that are decentralized, meaning there isn't just one entity that's sort of in charge of everything that you go to and say, hey, there's a problem, can you deal with it? But even then, there are questions as to whether, if you're on a platform and you're building, your own island on a particular platform, how are you dividing up responsibility as far as monitoring the behavior of avatars and what they're doing? And it's a bit, it reminds me a little bit of, you have a technology services agreement where you're hiring one party to do something, but then they subcontract out to others, and you have to figure out, are you hiring one person to handle everything, or do you have to enter into separate contracts with every single person that's doing something that's part of this development project, right? So in the metaverse, how is that responsibility being allocated? And you can make, for now, you can make it contractual, right? You could just decide, hey, I'm doing a deal with your platform. you're going to build an island that has the theme of my content, and you can delineate in the contract which party is going to be responsible for, the behavior of avatars in whatever space, depending on, what the licensor has, right? Because it may be that the licensors, the content owners have no ability to do that, and they'll be really relying on the platforms to do it. Or sometimes you have a little more collaboration and interaction in the development process, and so maybe there's more of a sharing of responsibility. But the high level point is, when you're licensing your content or your brand, you really have to think about context. Where can your brand or IP be used, and how can it be used? Because a lot of what's great about a metaverse environment is that there may be like limitless possibilities for creation within it, right? But you may not want your brand or content to be used in certain ways. And this gets to something I mentioned earlier about, well, what types of tools or controls are in place to ensure that, content is only used in a certain way, right? Or an avatar can only do certain things with content. Who's monitoring for issues in the first place? And then what are the actual measures that can be taken when a problem arises? And right now, it's just a completely, it's something that we just delineate in the contract of who does what. Because right now, I think the focus for a lot of platforms is just getting people in, making an experience interesting, but it's hard to control for every possible problem. And that's why I think as things keep going, we'll start plugging holes of like problems that we see and solving them with a combination of technology and, additional legal protections. But it's definitely, it's really interesting, right? I mean, like if an avatar that's wearing, again, we'll use, a certain brand on a shirt, right? That on their virtual shirt, and they commit some crime in the metaverse, would the brand owner be able to actually say, well, I want to rescind that avatar's right to use my shirt, on their avatar body, right? I mean, theoretically, it could be possible to actually disable the content access. Like, you couldn't stop someone necessarily from wearing that shirt in the real world, right? They bought the shirt, they're wearing it, they're walking around, but you could potentially do that in a metaverse context where you like cut off the link between the NFT and the, file where the image of the brand is. And so then it's just an empty, space where the brand was on the shirt. I mean, all those types of things are possible now in the metaverse, right? There's just a question of how far, do brands and content owners want to go? How far are platform, folks that run the platforms willing to go? Because it's a lot to deal with too, right? Managing all of the users within a space. So it's it starts to become very big as you talk about the different possibilities. But it's definitely interesting, and right now I think folks are just trying to manage as best they can based on sort of where things stand at the moment.
Yeah, I heard it called sell now, moderate later, and I think that's kind of where we're going. Let's get in, let's get these brands and products in there and figure out how to better address these issues when they arise.
Hey, Dorian, we've been talking about NFTs and the token side. We've been talking about the conducts of the avatars. What issues do you see from a creator streamer's perspective that could be interesting to consider as well?
Yeah, sure. Quickly going back to the creator economy that's really happening in the metaverse right now, talking about creating those worlds. A lot of creators who are engaging with some of these platforms are actually entering into an agreement where they're going to create certain worlds or also spend a certain amount of time within worlds. And that's been really interesting to negotiate some of those agreements on behalf of the creators to see how much work actually goes into creating a world. I feel like before I knew how the sauce was made, that an influencer or creator's life was cake and that they were just lucky to get paid anything. And now seeing what they have to do, I see some of these agreements that require that the creators spend 160 hours a month within the space. So it's really a full-time job. and that's apart from any other brand deals that they have or have to be doing. So we've seen lots of issues with burnout and essentially what looks like, we've talked about some labor issues and whether they're employees or child labor or all of the above. So I think we're going to see more rise of the creator economy, and we're seeing creator agencies, and I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing creator unions or something similar, just because of the working conditions and the lack of transparency that a lot of these creators have compared to what other creators are getting paid or what they're required to do.
Excellent. Before going to Q&As, I've been giving a lot of thought and how our practice, especially in Latin America, is going to be affected by this. Sometimes, and especially because we're in ASIPI, we tend to see this as an IP issue, mostly. So this technology, this is an IP, so piece of cake, we're good. But I've been giving a lot of thought, and I would like to share a few things with you guys before the Q&A in 2 minutes. The first one, I think the Metaverse is here to stay. I must confess, I'm guilty. Like a year ago, I said, nah, who's Fortnite? No, forget it. And I was totally wrong. And I've been playing catching up this past 6 months, but this is something here to stay. And the interesting thing is that I've been talking to, I'm in a general practice firm, and I've seen guys from the tax department, from the fintech group, from the technology side, from the labor side, as you were saying, everyone starting to raise a flag, hey, this is important. So, of course, a lot of IP issues, but there are a lot of other practitioners looking into this space. So, my recommendation and what we're trying to do is we need to broaden the scope of our education and try to really understand this from the connectors side. What are the issues that need to be connected? And hopefully within your firms, you run point on this, because it's mostly today an IP issue, but the ramifications are huge. So this is a great opportunity. We always thinking about the protocol and the trademarks, but this is a huge opportunity, but we're not the only shark in the water here, and we need to start making those connections. The other thing that always come up, there's so many behavioral tax jurisdictional issues around this that I wouldn't be surprised that we're going to get the actions, especially in Latin America from politicians, because it's, as opposed to the US, you have case law.
You guys can pass laws.
Yeah, we tend to pass laws, and people will want to jump to fame with some regulation. So I think we will need to be very careful. We're going to be influencers first to educate our authorities on what were the real issues. We saw the Nike example on how to position ourselves in the branding and how to protect that. But that's not only it. We need to understand the tax implications, the jurisdictional implications, and so forth. And it's going to be very good to start, as of today, educating clients what is going to be better. Is this a form of licensing? Is this a form of service? Are you going to activate in your accountability? Are you going to be able to create intercompany agreements? Or is this going to be a service source type of agreement between related entities? Those questions really matter to clients, and we need to start finding solutions. So when we face a question, should we regulate or not? I guess ASIPI has a great role here, and probably we need to wait and see in this balancing act, and so we should educate legislators, but mostly try not to pursue legislation that might be justifiable for atrocious cases of abuse or whatever, but it could be hampering the possibility of moving this forward. And finally, I think we need to give a lot of thought about enforcement. Today, as opposed to the main name system where you have a root server and ICANN has certain degree at least to pull the plug at one point, this metaverse and this parallel worlds, Web3 and so forth, does not have this structural entity that is going to be able to easily enforce it. So you have to probably go enforcing this depending on the jurisdiction where the server is located, metaverse by metaverse. And that's a big challenge for clients, and probably we need to start working in some form of auto regulation or so forth to get something unique across the board and preserve our clients' rights. So I think we've learned a lot today. We have some time for Q&As, and please, in the back.
Thank you, great presentation. In a resell environment where a third-party resells that acquires one of the kind shoes from Nike, let's say, and they want to resell it, and they do resell it on the physical wall, but they want to sell that NFT or representation of that shoe so you can wear it as an avatar on the Metaverse. Would you expect any kind of blowback from Nike regarding that?
Sure. So I think the first sale doctrine would cover you for reselling the physical good, and even, and this is the US obviously, and there are always exceptions to the rule, right? But generally speaking, probably first sale doctrine would apply to the sale of the physical good. I think you would probably also have the right to advertise the fact that you're selling this physical good. But I think when you tip into the digital world that you're essentially selling either an ancillary product or a derivative product of that shoe, which I think in that case, there would be more of a valid claim from Nike to have that you're violating, or whoever the shoe product is, their trademark or other IP rights. So I think when you move into the digital space instead of just reselling the physical shoe, you excerpt yourself out of that safe harbor, and that would be more of an issue. Now, I think if you were to take maybe some creative license and create a unique original shoe, where that's a different story, but I think recreating the shoe in a digital space as based off of protected IP would likely be an issue.
Meaning, if I'm the buyer, let's say that I bought that one-of-a-kind shoes and I want to be wearing that as an avatar, that shoe that I acquired legally from Nike, let's say.
Yeah, great question. I think that we're going to have to see, look, I think that practically speaking, if you did that, Nike would sue you. Particularly if it was like a well-known use or somehow made you a lot of money. If it was just one person who created the shoe, maybe it wouldn't even rise to their attention. But if it is a prominent use, I think you'd have to assume that you would get sued. I think what we're learning here, and it's an important thing that I think that we're all trying to learn, is our reality or our perceptions about ownership changing compared to the physical world and the virtual world? Do we feel like do our ownership rights feel different digitally? And do we expect to have certain ownership rights that are similar in the physical world, in the digital world? And if so, what are those? And I think it's really going to be an important part that I talked about in the top of the presentation, educating consumers and users, particularly if you're a brand or a platform, what rights they're getting. Because I think right now consumers are very confused, and that's a lot of the sort of trepidation. Am I really owning this thing that I'm buying? Maybe, maybe not. But I think you're right. We're going to have to figure out what ownership rights look like in the digital world, and maybe they're the same as the physical world, and maybe not.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Dorian, Adrian, and Guillermo. Very interesting, I think there's a lot, as Dorian was saying. Tell me when to stop because there's so much to talk about it. One question, and I think is related to the question that we just had, and Dorian, in this case, your answer. Ownership in this metaverse. You and I were commenting earlier in that every one of us, when getting into something now in the internet or the metaverse, as we like to call it, will go click accept and get in. We probably may not bother to read the terms and conditions, and we may particularly skip going through the small print. So when we talk about monetization, and we are thinking that we have been able to kind of grab a right, and we possess that right, we may not be able to further, and not talking about the first sale doctrine, but talking about who actually owns what, from the avatar to other elements that may then allow you to enter into a monetization process. So one question would be, what should we look at if we enter this metaverse and make sure that we are really understanding what we're going to be entitled to commercialize or monetize? And what about something that you guys, Adrian and Dorian, you discussed, which was interoperability. Will I be limited to a specific metaverse? What will happen? This reminds me of the cell phone companies at the beginning, that you were assigned a given number, but you want to move to the other company, which was probably giving people a better service, but you wouldn't be able to take your number with you. So should we look at something in specific here, and probably Dorian and also Adrian?
Sure, I'll hop in on that one first quickly and then send it over to Adrian. So you're telling me that you don't read all of those terms every time you click yes? Yeah, I think we have an issue with that. And I think the courts in the US at least are seeing various issues with that. Are these lengthy terms enforceable? And I think that that's something that we're going to continue to grapple with from a practical perspective. I would advise that you advise your clients to try to be as clear and concise with the users as possible about what terms apply, whether it be the sale of an NFT, or access to a platform, or using a digital currency within a platform. I think as clear as you can convey to consumers what rights they're giving, the better it's going to be for everybody. I think that we're going to have to figure out a way to better educate people with this, whether it be through advertising or otherwise. And it's going to be interesting to see what enforcement mechanisms are put into place, whether it's enforcements of terms that may not be valid or not. I've seen issues where people thought it was IP infringement, but the platform claimed that they were removing the infringing content because it violated codes of conduct. Like, are we using other terms to essentially bypass our way to enforce IP infringement rights? It's pretty interesting. I think it's also going to be really important, particularly if you're advising branding clients and those who are building things within a metaverse or a platform, to understand those platforms' terms. Just because you build something within a metaverse doesn't mean you own it. And actually, in most of the metaverses that exist today, if you build something within the metaverse, you probably don't own it. So again, it's just clearly understanding what the rules are at play of that particular world. Maybe we'll get into some kind of decentralized metaverse where there really is open and free ownership. But if you balance that freedom with then how are you going to protect your own rights if there is no enforcement mechanism with that freedom, then I think it's really kind of a chaotic place. And sometimes chaos is good. It's not always good for making money, though.
I agree with all those thoughts. Another thing to be mindful of is not just the terms, but also all the marketing language and the marketing that goes on in Discord channels and on the homepage of the site and social media. All that stuff is important too, and can get you in legal trouble depending on how you're marketing whatever the platform is, the NFT, the metaverse experience, you name it. I think that is one of the boxes you have to check, is sort of consumer protection issues, and so that's another thing that you have to, you may get involved in reviewing. But right now, it's a world governed by terms of use, and these incredibly important agreements that no one really reads. That is what's setting the framework right now for everything. But I agree with Dorian. If we want to see real widespread adoption and growth, I think there needs to be education on what is an NFT and what is a metaverse. Like, all these things need to be explained so that people can understand it better and get comfortable. Otherwise, there'll be some real impediments to, real widespread adoption, which is where, we're talking about monetization, right? You want to see real economic opportunity. You got to get people comfortable with the tech and the space and what do they own, what do they don't, and being very clear about that. And it's the same kind of thing that we would see with privacy policies, right? Where they have a little summary up top. I mean, it may be that we have to head in that direction, with some, headlines or something, at the top of these agreements, these end user agreements, so people know, like, look, if you build something in our platform, we own it, or, you own this and we own that. I mean, it just has to be clear, because, there's a lot of people that still, think like when they buy an NFT that they're buying, the IP or something like that, which is very often not the case. Like almost never, right? You're getting just a right to look at an image. But even that very basic point is still, it's not clear to folks, and it's no one's fault. It's like a sort of a, I won't say it's a bizarre concept, but it's just like an unusual concept, right? So you have to explain it to people that aren't necessarily immersed in this day in, day out. And I think once people start to get more comfortable with what it is, that's when you're really going to see a lot of growth. So.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Yo la verdad tengo.
Thank you very much. I have panic with Martin, who threatened me that we should go beyond the time. So,
Very much, Adrian, for your help and insights. And this is something, as you both said, we will have to maintain a balancing act to be able to and learn and educate our authorities and everyone to be able to navigate this waters. So thank you for your attention, and now we end this panel, and I give the floor to Martin. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorian. Adrian, he will stay here for a few minutes so you can take the picture, the three of you, okay? Y gracias, Guillermo. Espectacular.
thank you, Guillermo. Right on time. We have 15 minutes now break. 15, so at 15 to 45, we come back for the last talk for today. Last but not least, I recommend you to be here. It's very interesting.